This module addresses the question of why is your company sharing profits with you now, or general financial numbers, when perhaps they didn't in the past. And statistically, for 20 years, I've asked a room full of executives to raise hands as far as how many were sharing all the general financial numbers with all the employees on a regular basis. In the world distribution, routinely, it's been sort of single digits, 5, 6, 7% of the people in the room. And when we asked, well, why, they just kind of thought, well, no particular reason. We just kind of haven't ever done it, but they weren't sure about how to go about it. And hopefully this video is providing a total comprehension approach to letting everybody understand what the numbers are and what it means and so forth. But certainly with the numbers, we all can now start to try to measure and figure out how to improve things. So now we can try learning, fall on our face forward experiments, see if the data changes, etc. And it makes the game fun, so we can see how we're doing as opposed to doing things in a vacuum. If you ask the question, well, why haven't, come on, let's be a little bit more serious about this. Why haven't we shared the numbers in the past? Here are some of the answers I hear. The biggest one is, well, we just never did it. I mean, it's always, I inherited the business, or I came in as a junior guy, and this was always the policy, the practice, not to share numbers, so I just never thought about it. It just was part of the background. It's kind of like, why did women not get the vote till the early 20s, and then major universities didn't go co-ed until the early 70s? You kind of think, well, in retrospect, that seemed not fair, but that's what happened. It was just part of the culture of the country. Second point is that a lot of managers will say, well, we don't really know the numbers that well. You have to realize numbers gyrate all over the place. Usually when you have end-of-the-year financial reports created by an accounting firm, there are surprises. There are big write-ups, write-downs. You even see this in Wall Street, where big professional firms, publicly traded firms are announcing earnings surprises. I mean, it's not that they weren't trying to do the right thing, but there's 9 million words in the tax code. It's a complicated thing. Chrysler a few years ago had a picture where they were sending in their tax return to the IRS. It was 35 feet high as far as all the forms they had to figure out. So it's not necessarily easy to measure and comply with all these things and really know what really are earnings and what aren't. So when you have gyrations like that, it's sort of difficult to say, well, this month, we had a big loss, but we didn't really because we had 3 pay periods. The next month we'll have a big gain because we have fewer pay periods. That kind of stuff is just a lot of static. It's difficult to explain. Maybe to put it in personal terms, if I said, what's your current bank balance right now? Most guys would say, I'm not sure what my current checking account balance is. If I asked you for 1999, after all the earning and spending and saving and so forth, how much money did you actually save or go in the hole on? What was your total increase, decrease in net worth? Very few people would even have a clue. And companies are much more complicated than just personal, financial accounting. A third reason is that, a lot of professional managers are generalists. They have to wear a lot of hats, and the hat they least like to wear is sort of financial accounting kind of stuff. And, they're not really practiced great teachers in teaching, financial management fluency. And so hopefully this video sort of helps to fill a gap there. The additional questions to look at, or points of why not the numbers haven't been shared, is some guys would say, well, if we did share the numbers and they found out that they really were so meager, 7% return on investment, 2% growth, shall we keep doing the same? That's not very motivating to a lot of employees for the long run. Other people say, well, if we told them all the numbers, they would think we were lying, because they think they're 20, 40% as a profits or as a percent of sales. It's all going out of the business. If we told them the real scoop, they would think they're lying, because part of why we keep the numbers private, is presumably people would think we're keeping the numbers private because they're so good, and we're withholding a really great, rich story. So when we actually show them the reality, they're going to kind of distrust it at first. Others say, well, maybe some of my employees would panic. They'd say, my gosh, the profits are so fragile. Maybe I should get with a faster growing, more profitable company. Other people say, well, we share all the numbers. what's to keep an employee from leaving and being disgruntled and go work for the competitor and show the numbers to the competitor? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. I have to tell you in personal experiences that I've gotten financial numbers from privately held competitors, and there's nothing I can do about it. I mean, it doesn't help me run my business any different or better or whatever. One guy said, I have a real tough union. If I share all the numbers, they're going to say, we want half of your profit after tax. And I pointed out that the union right now thinks that profit after tax is 10, 20 times bigger than it really is. So a pretty disarming strategy is to say, you know what, the company is really doing pretty poorly, and if the union wants to survive and have more jobs, because presumably if we grow we can hire more people and so forth, the union has got to be part of the high-performance solution too. I mean, they're a stakeholder. They want the ecosystem to get better also. So those are some of the reasons that I've heard. But, you know, getting back to, well, we just have never done it before, it's a cultural thing. That's a very difficult thing to give up for maybe a lot of reasons. So hopefully this video is going to be a catalyst and a gap filler to allow the company to share numbers on a better basis so we can then start measuring and getting better results. This slide gets across some of the reactions I got in a case study where I went in and the company had been losing money for 2 years. I instantly shared all the numbers of all the employees, and some people got panicked right away. And I said, no, wait a minute. Why are you panicking? You know, you've got your job right now. If the company went out of business tomorrow, you could quickly go across the street and get another kind of job just like you're doing, because this company was not paying their employees very well at all. I said, I've really got the most to lose, but here's my plan. I believe in it, and so I'm not worried. We can borrow a little more money from the bank to finance some losses, but in the longer run, we're going to make good money, and I'm sleeping well at night. The second one was confusion. You know, I would go and share numbers with all the employees, 3, 4, 5 times, and I'd go ask them what they understood, and they didn't really understand it. But we hung in there, and after 25 repetitions, they all understood it, and they were taking turns leading the group as far as sharing the numbers. Some people started coming up over time saying, well, these numbers putting them up makes me nervous, and I wish we were doing better, and maybe you should just take them down. Sort of like, can we just all put our head in the sand again and pretend like an ostrich and pretend the company's really doing better than it is? And I said, no, that's not an alternative. We've got to, we've got to be brave. We've got to look at reality, and then we've got to deal with it, and we can. Some of it was delayed listening. When I would ask employees after 4 repetitions of monthly numbers, what did you comprehend, understand? They'd say, well, I don't, it goes in one ear, makes a little sense, and goes out the other ear. But I do know that 1, the company's in good hands. 2, you really are doing productive stuff around here. I thought you just kind of went out for lunch. And I think the company's, in good hands. And I said, well, why do you think that? And he said, well, you obviously are looking me right in the eye. You got the terms and so forth. You're either the world's greatest con artist, or you know what you're doing, kind of thing. So, and really the biggest take home for these guys was, coming in and having you share all the numbers, even though I don't know what they mean, it's saying to me, I'm on the team and you trust me, and your faith that I can eventually get this gives me faith in myself, and I think I can. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I'm going to hang in there and try to do it. And sooner or later, 15, 20, 25 repetitions, they were all there. They were financially fluent and part of the profit-building solution. So the key things to remember in this section are what gets measured can possibly improve. If it's a vacuum and we can't measure it, we can't improve it. So we've got to share the numbers as one of the ingredients of the high-performance soup recipe we're brewing here. As we share the numbers, it starts to ask questions about how we can improve. So we come up with theories, we try experiments. Some of the experiments work, some of them don't. But the ones that work, we feed them, and then the numbers start to get better. So it's a key catalyst for how we grow and how we learn. And it's going to be the key sort of catalyst for the bottom 90% to start moving towards the top 10%. Thank you. You're to be congratulated. You are now in the last module of the financial fluency section. So the boring part of this module, this video is over, and sections 3, 4, and 5 really talk about much more interesting stuff as far as how we make the company more productive and profitable. And but most of you are not financially fluent as you need to be, and so in this module I want to review some of the key concepts of this whole section 2, but also talk a little bit about the practicing strategy you're going to need to have to become financially fluent. You realize that, looking back over section 2, that the free market and you set wages. Free market at the low end sets what minimally people can pay for a wage, whereas you and all your teammates working together can get your wages to the high-end premium end of the job niche you're in, supported by premium productivity. You also appreciate that profit after tax has got 4 different purposes. Right now, the bottom 90% of all distributors actually have a fairly anemic, poor return on investment that is not going to give you the future that you really would like. Now, when I talk about financial fluency, what I mean is I sometimes get excited and I talk, instead of at 150 to 200 words a minute, I talk with gusts up to 300 to 400 words a minute. And if I say something like PBIT, which is a pronunciation of PBIT, which stands for profit before interest and tax, which is what you have before you deduct interest and taxes before you get to profit after tax. You may have gone through that whole little process in your head, okay, that's what PBIT is. Meanwhile, I'm another 150 words down the road, and you've missed all of that verbiage because you were hung up mechanically translating a term. So with practice, whether somebody says operating profit, operating income, PBIT, EBIT, earnings before interest tax, these are all really synonyms for the same financial term. And so it just takes practice before you really get that. Now, in the video drill, hopefully you're getting 3 repetitions. You watch the video, you try to do the little homework questions and get some vocabulary there, review. You may have to watch the video second time. It's watch, and write. 3 repetitions, and then through discussion questions, you'll pick up more. But it takes a lot more than that, and don't be disappointed by it. I get inspiration from coaching stories. For example, Red Auerbach, who was the head coach, general manager of the Boston Celtics for a zillion years and won 9 NBA championships back in the late 50s and early 60s, he supposedly had 7 plays that his team would run. But he really ran 4 plays, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 90% of the time. And, one of the guards, Bob Cousy or Casey Jones, would come down the court and they'd call play 2, and they'd start running play 2. And after a while, the players said, all the other teams know these plays, by heart. And so they decided to be tricky, and what they were going to do was to bump all the plays 1 point. So play 1 was going to become play 2, and play 2 was going to become 3, all the way to 7 was going to become play 1. So they come into the court, the guard calls play 2, half the guys go one way, half the guys go the other way. So the coach calls a timeout and he says, forget this. Let's go back to just play 1 is play 1, etc. The important thing is execution. If you have to think about what you're doing, in other words, there's no fluency, then you're not going to execute, and you're not going to be able to see the improvisational opportunities that the plays really create anyway. Another coach I drew great inspiration was John Madden. Most of you might know him as a commentator on television, but in my youth, he was the head coach of the Oakland Raiders, and nobody won 100 NFL games in fewer seasons than he did. And he did it with every misfit, goofball guy in the league. They're all these super talented athletes that just wouldn't fit in other organizations. He said, hey, come here, we got a home for you. It's okay for everybody to be different. Al Davis, the owners, just said, just do it, just win. And so there's a lot of toleration of individual sort of what we call learning differences. And some people needed 25 repetitions, some people needed 10. It didn't matter. So let's go to the next slide, and here are some sort of coach tip fluency practicing guidelines. First of all, let's start with the assumption that everybody can eventually get it. Some people don't read the English language so well because it isn't even their first language. Some people, mechanically listen not as well because they have an audio memory disability and their neurochemistry. So there are lots of ways to get the story across, whether it's pennies on the table or it's charts on the wall, or let's talk about it, in variations on a theme. And that's a challenge, to figure out how creative you can be in your repetition. It also helps to get other people who might be getting bored or intolerant to make them part of the teaching solution. So you say up front, we're going to go over this one more time. Does anybody want to do it? Anybody want to be the teacher? And all of a sudden the board guys say, no, I don't think I want to teach it because actually I don't really know it that well. Another thing is, as we go through it, point out there are no dumb questions. I don't care if it's the 25th repetition and you're saying, you know, I don't get a term, could you explain it to me? That's okay. The key thing is, in the long run, we're all going to know it, and that's what's important. So to know something is not be able to teach it. To be able to teach it doesn't mean the whole team is doing it on an instinctive, reflexive, and fluent basis, maybe even under pressure. So that's the kind of fluency we want. If we have that kind of financial fluency over time, we should also start to see, behavior modification. So for example, you'll start to see in groups of people, people will start to ask questions that are more insightful using the new terminology. For example, I called once to a Denver warehouse of a company I was managing at the time, and the receptionist answered. And I said, her name was Sheila, I said, have you seen the financial numbers for your branch yet? I haven't seen them. How'd you do? And she said, oh, we did great. We had a new record in sales, but it was not a record in gross margin dollars because we had a few big bids that went through that we bid, frankly, I think at too low a price, because when you look at our incremental profits, operating profit that we had, it didn't grow as fast as our sales, and it won't be sufficient to finance the incremental inventory and receivables we have. I think some of these big bids, we ought to raise the prices and pass on them. Volume is vanity, profit is sanity. And she didn't use exactly those words, but she intuitively understood a concept called the long-term sustainable growth rate formula. Another time, 3 guys came in to ask me in a given warehouse at one of the locations. They said, there are 10 guys in the warehouse. And one guy just isn't doing it, can't make it. And the truth of the matter is we think he needs to go. But if he went, could the other 9 of us have his 10% of the wage pool in a raise? So in other words, we'll be 9 fewer people, on average of better quality, and you pay us more and expect more because we know we can easily do it. I was sort of caught in a funny position. Usually it's the managers coming around being the tough guy, telling the slowpoke guy, the guy who can't keep up with the rest of the herd, the wolves are going to get you. And here all of a sudden I said, well, wait a minute. I think the guy's good. I think he can do it. We just have to have a little patience. Maybe we need to try, teaching in a different way type of thing. So you find that once you put numbers up and everybody becomes responsible for them, you could fool your boss for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. You can't fool your peers for longer than about 30 seconds or 3 minutes. And so really the boss now becomes more of a kind of a facilitating coach to make sure that the numbers are used in the most productive way for the long term. Other behavior things you'll see is spontaneous pride. In a chain of distribution companies I was running, as the numbers started getting better, unknowns to any managers, warehouse teams started to contest to see which warehouses had the best total productivity metrics, and they created I'm not even going to tell you, it was sort of a off-color sort of trophy joke that went to the warehouse of the month, and I guess if you won it enough months in a row, you retired or something. But the spirit was that, hey, you know what? We're doing well, and we take pride in that, and we're challenging their guys to keep up and do well, because the truth of the matter is the whole company is tied together, and none of us are going to outperform how the whole company does in the long run. So what you'll see is more bottom-up initiative, use of terms, ideas that show that the financial fluency has been mastered. Now, the grand conclusions for this module and this section are that we have now got to the end of the beginning. And if you have patience-based enthusiasm for repetitive practice, then I think that the confusion you may have right now, it's going to melt away. Take a lot of confidence in the rule of 5 to 7, which says the average adult has to go through something 5 to 7 times before they really start to understand it in a way that they won't forget it. That doesn't mean they can do it or teach it. That takes more repetitions. But it will happen, and the enthusiasm will follow. And now in sections 3 and 4, when we get into those, we'll find out that that's the how-to meat of the matter as far as how we're going to transform our company. But now at least we hopefully have the beginning of financial fluency that we need to go forward. Thanks. This is the kickoff section for section 3, which is going to get into a lot of the how-to productivity improvement, grow profit application ideas. I think that the message of section 2, which is all about the ABCs of finance and capitalism, was that the bottom 90% of all distributors have insufficient profit after tax to finance future ambition for all stakeholders involved with those companies. And this is in spite of the fact that those companies, if you went to them and said, well, what's going on? They'd say, we're working harder. And they're looking at the financial numbers very aggressively. They tend to have incentive programs, particularly for branch manager type people, salespeople, saying, beat last year and we'll give you bonus bucks. Everybody's working as hard as they can, but not seeming to have good results. So the question is, we have to stop working harder and we have to work smarter. But before you work smarter, you have to get in touch with the underlying, usually unspoken assumptions for what it takes to be successful. So in this particular module, I want to go after the financial management assumptions that are going on. Now, to look at assumption reassessment in general, if you look in history, when a big scientific breakthrough happens, Galileo decides the Earth is not the center of the heavens, rather revolves around the sun, and the Roman Catholic Church locked him up for the rest of his life. Or Columbus says the world's not flat, it's round, let's go west to get east. These kind of things have profound effects on how business, as usual, goes on after that. If you look at the United States, it was invented from 1776 to 1789 when we had the incorporation of Confederacy with, the Constitution. And yet it still took 85 years to free the slaves. But that was just the beginning. Okay, we changed a big assumption there as far as what was right and wrong, but that didn't mean that former slaves were mainstream Americans right away. That's been a very long process. Same with the treatment of women. They didn't get the vote until 1918, and then you had to be over 30 to vote. But that didn't mean that there was, feminist equality in 1918. That still took a long time. So if your company changes its assumptions about, hey, we had to share all of the general financial numbers with all the employees, or hey, instead of thinking zero-sum stakeholder liquidation, let's figure out how to work together to create a better ecosystem where we all do better and have a virtuous cycle going on. So we're going to challenge the basic assumptions now of financial management. And the basic assumption there is if you look at profit after tax and you want that to be bigger, then what you do is you go manage the numbers above. You get more sales, you buy lower, you sell higher, you hired people cheap, you work them hard, you collect your money early, you pay late. Those kinds of slogans or mantras would make the profit after tax number and the return on investment get better if it worked. But actually all those things don't work, and I want to spend some time sort of debunking that. But first I want to give you the history of financial management. In 1915, a controller DuPont invented something called the DuPont profit model. And I'm not going to go into it, but it looks kind of like a tennis chart, a draw sheet where you get down to final return on investment. And the implicit assumption is by manipulating other financial numbers, which are symptoms, not root causes, you can get better results. Well, in a way, it worked from 1915 to 1974 because in those days you set up big new companies, manufacturing plants, and you would bring workers there, and you could have a flood of new immigrants that you, to a certain degree, could exploit, and you would have company towns. And out of that culture came the song 16 Tons by Tennessee Ernie Ford in 1955, where it's, hey, I owe my soul to the company store. And then from 46 to 74, the economy, for lots of unforeseen reasons, just boomed and boomed and boomed, which made all the boats go up. The whole country got multiple to 3 times richer over a period of time because of accidents of history, really. So, if everyone is doing the same dysfunctional management style or assumptions, financial management, then in a sense it's a fair fight. And financial management as a true science sort of reached its peak between 72 and 78 when guys like Harold Janine were building big conglomerates by the numbers, or that's the time from 72 to 78 when all the different wholesale distribution associations started creating their financial performance reports, somehow thinking in the numbers we can find the profit power. But that's not the case. And let's go back and look at the different parts of that, the financial management mantra, buy low, sell high. In theory, if you buy lower or sell higher, you're going to increase your margin percent spread. And so, but buy low is not buying the lowest price, it's buying the lowest total procurement cost. And there are about 11 different elements of total procurement cost, and we'll look at that in a future module. And often, the best economic deal has a higher price, but because the one-stop shopping is so good, the service is so good, the lead time for the supplier is so good, the turns go up a lot higher, and the fill rates are a lot better. So the total economic, the turn and fill rate economic, is better at a higher price than if you bought the low price and had a lower turn and lower fill rates. Same on the sell high side. You can go look at Federal Express versus the post office, an overnight delivery service. FedEx charges twice the price the post office does, and FedEx has 65% share market. I think UPS is about 35%, and the post office only has 5%. Because in spite of their very low prices, nobody wants to use their service because it doesn't get there. It's first of all, it's user unfriendly as far as getting the package to the post office or having them pick it up. And then they won't guarantee that it'll get there. So it's bargain price. Yeah, there's price savings, but the service is so poor that the cost of the lousy service exceeds the price savings. Now, that's an exception to be able to get a 100% increase over the competitor's price. As a general rule in retail wholesale, if you have distinctive service in the customer's mind, not yours, you can get last look at about 5 to 10% more than your competitor's value added. Now, your competitor's value added is their margin percent. To make my math easy, if a competitor was in an account at 20% margin, in theory, we'd go in and get 22% because 10% of 20% is another 2 points. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but most of that flows through the bottom line. And for the average distributor, that would double their bottom line all by itself. So, you want to sell high, but you can't sell high unless you've got some unique marketing proposition, aside from the commodity, because everybody's got the same commodity, and that's going to be your basic service brilliance. The next slogan is collect early. Yeah, well, you can collect early as far as receivables if your customers have the money. But maybe they don't. Maybe you sold deadbeats to begin with. So we have our credit department constantly calling people up, saying, where's the check? Okay, we'll send another copy of the invoice, that sort of stuff. But preventatively, maybe the sales force needs to work more hand in hand with the credit department to be sort of an early warning preventative system to try to target accounts that look like they are high performers themselves. So not only are they growing faster, but making good money, putting the money back in the business to have the working capital to pay their bills on time. Finally, if you have service that's distinctively better than the competition, you will find that you can ask, for payment, otherwise threaten to put people on credit hold, and they're more responsive because if you put them on credit hold, you're denying them a service that they can't get anywhere else. They're addicted to your good service. So that also helps to collect a little bit better. The next part of the mantra is pay late to your suppliers. In other words, if we wait another 15 days before we pay our suppliers, we've borrowed their money for 15 days longer, in theory interest-free, but that's not the way it works out. You may remember in an earlier module we looked at the high performers, the top 10% companies, and noticed that they were paying in 25 days, whereas the rest of the distributors were paying in 28. You'd say, well, wait a minute, if you're supposed to pay late, why are they paying faster? And the answer is, a lot of manufacturers offer incentives to pay quicker that are worth taking when you look at the time, value, cost of money. If you do pay late, you run the risk of the supplier saying, well, I'm not going to ship the stuff. I'm going to put you on credit hold. Then what happens is your fastest moving items, the A-plus items, stock out real quickly. And you can imagine what it would be like to go to a grocery store and find out they don't have milk and eggs and butter, the fastest bread, the fastest moving things. People are going to quickly go to the competition. So what happens is you get put on credit hold, your fill rates tank, your service tanks, your average order size tanks. You start having split shipments and so forth to trying to satisfy the customer at much greater expense. So all in all, it's better to take discounts worth taking and ignore the pay late, general guideline. The last, well, not the last, but the next part of the slogan is hire them cheap and work them hard. And this is probably the most damaging of all, and I hit it pretty hard in section 2. As far as my bias is to pay more to get more, to expect more, and engineer a lot more value add and responsibility into the job, because then you can make basic service brilliance and all the other productivity plays yet to come happen. So there'll be a lot more on this in the future, but clearly, to pretend to pay people who then pretend to show up and work and psychologically leave the company before they physically leave the company is not a good long-term solution for all stakeholders. A next piece of the puzzle is let's sell more. And one of the reasons you want to sell more is, in theory, it's what the stakeholders want. Suppliers want you to buy more from them. If we sold more, we get more margin dollar but not add warm bodies as fast as sales is growing, so productivity per warm body is going up, and that would afford better wages or promotion from within. So there are a number of good benefits from growing. It seems to be an imperative. But one hope is that if we get bigger, we'll have economies of scale. If you think about, well, we got a phone system, it's in. We got a computer system, it's in. If we can grow our volume 10, 15%, not to add to those systems, then more of the incremental margin dollar goes to the bottom line because it doesn't have to pay for overhead costs that are growing in proportion. But that pretty much doesn't exist anymore. You'll find in distribution, all expenses in a distribution company ultimately are variable costs, meaning if sales go up 10%, all the other costs go up too. And you can see this in financial numbers. If you look at all of the very large chains that exist in lots of different distribution channels, and you look at their profitability, if anything, there's a slight correlation between being bigger and not making as good a return on investment. It seems that the bigger you get, the more locations you have, the more apt you are to have diseconomies of scale as far as local service is concerned at different distribution centers. If you look at some of the giants, take a company like W.W. Grainger, which is $5 billion in sales, publicly traded, and for years they've made premium margins, premium profitability. Well, they didn't get big because they were buying better. They got big because they had a great business model that made great profits, and they were able to finance their growth internally for a long, long time. So the question is, well, and it's one thing to say, let's sell more, but the question is, well, how do you do it? How do you force customers to buy more from you? They're only going to buy what they're going to buy. And the answer there is two things. One is, if we go and we target and successfully sell customers who are growing faster in their industry than the average guy in their industry, and they're growing faster because they're eating somebody else's lunch, if we can marry those guys, they'll grow us faster than their whole segment. So we go to the gazelles and say, we figured it out. You're growing faster than everybody else. You make a lot of money, put it back in the business. So if we married you, you would buy more from us every year and pay your bills on time. Of course, they're going to say, but why should we marry you? And hopefully you're going to say part 2 of this slide, which is, well, we have basic service brilliance, and therefore you're going to get a good value from doing business with us. And we'll get into something called service retention economics in module 3.14. So the summary points are, financial numbers are important, don't get me wrong. I mean, we need to watch our numbers closely so we don't run out of cash, and we need to pay our taxes on time. But paying taxes on time and being consistent with accounting rules and conventions is not what gives customers great value. We have got to figure out where value creation for customers comes from and figure out how to be the low-cost, high-value producer of that. And we can't look at financial management simplistic ideas like buy low, sell high. We have to look at the total economics. So we don't want to buy a lower price, we want to buy a lower total procurement cost. We don't want to hire cheap and work harder. We want to have premium productivity that offers premium wages, that offers premium profits, that you would not be able to conclude from just hire them cheap and work them hard. So keep your minds open, and let's go forward into section 3 looking at some of the cookbook how-to productivity plays. Thanks. The title of this module is How to Beat the Competition, but really a better way of phrasing the problem is how are we going to dominate one customer niche at a time? In other words, yeah, the competition's there, but let's not be distracted by the shenanigans. One customer niche at a time and give them exactly what they want. Point. Maybe a way slide where the total sales volume in a given channel might be X. You pick one segment of customer, and maybe that's only 60%. So you're saying 40% we're not even interested in. And even within the 60%, we only want to go after customers who value basic service brilliance. And we want to dominate those guys, and realistically we might get 50 to 80% of that. So it's possible that if you got 15 to 24% of all the volume, that doesn't sound like big market share, but in fact, it's a very dominating and profitable percent of the niche you're going after. Here's an example of a fast growth niche management case study. Fastenal is a publicly traded company based out of Minnesota. They've been in business for 23 years. You can see in 2000 they did $746 million in sales. Look at the profit after tax. It ran 10.8% of sales. That means their profit before interest and tax was 20%, and they grew their profits 23%. That's incredible. And you can see they have 12 distribution centers, 980 stores. They're planning to add yet another 100 to 150 stores in the next 12 months. That's enormous growth for somebody in the sort of C-store service of fasteners. Now the odds are that you're not, Fastenal, nor is your business model one that's going to give you that kind of growth. But it doesn't mean that if we don't figure out who our historic best number one niche is and go back and recultivate and do a better job there, that we can't grow our sales and profitability for some period of time, and usually longer than we think. And then if we ever get to the point where we maximize it out, then we're making such good money we can choose a second niche and go after that one. But I guess up front, the important thing is, can everybody in your company answer the following questions? First of all, what is our number one customer niche? In that niche, who are the 5 most profitable customers? We should know them by heart, because that'll allow us to give spontaneous extra service heroics for them if necessary. If we ask them what their top 5 most important service metrics were, what are they? And then where do we score them on the wall? And then what do you each do individually to make those service metrics happen? And the last question is, why do you care? What's in it for you? Now, by the end of the video, you should all know the answers to these questions. But right now, let's go through a 7-step process that explains how we're going to beat the competition for our number one niche of customers. First, we're going to start off with 3 players. There's the customers we're going after, there's us, and there's the competitors. Notice the customer box has got 3 sub-boxes because we're going to pick one of those niches, and then we're going to go out and we're going to ask them, hey, who are you? Why do you buy from us? Who do you buy from? What do we do well? What do we do that bugs you? Because the opposite's what you want. And if we listen very carefully, we're going to be able to come up with insights of subtle but important differences. So for example, you may go out and find that large contractors want to call between 4:30 and 6:30 in the afternoon to place orders that they're going to get delivered via UPS tomorrow morning because they're going to run out and do jobs with that stuff. But you also call industrial purchasing agents, and if you took an order from them at 5 in the afternoon and got it to them first thing the next morning, they'd be upset because they can't get the paperwork to the back dock quick enough to receive the stuff correctly. So inside salespeople would have to know the difference between the two, and if it was an industrial PA, they'd say, well, now when do you want it delivered? And make sure we hold that order and deliver it when they want it to be delivered. Another variation would be the people who come for counter sales. A lot of those guys may show up first thing in the morning and want to get in and out in 5 minutes because time is money. Each one of those things is a different deal. So what happens is we go out, listen carefully with a third ear to what the customer is saying, and come back with insights for how we reinvent ourselves. That's number 4, internally. So we have later cutoffs, we have more flexibility, we can take care of surges at our counter first thing in the morning and not put anybody on hold, that sort of thing. Now, if we can do those things, then the next thing is to go out and sell this service to our target niche kind of obnoxiously. In a future future Section 3 modules, we'll talk about this, but most importantly, Section 4 of this video is all about defining, measuring, achieving, selling, getting paid for basic service brilliance. But back to the model, if we go out step 5 and give them 105% of what they want, they start buying from us. Sooner or later, the competition may wise up and do 6A. They're going to go out and say, hey, didn't you guys used to buy from us? They'll say, yeah, but these other guys are better for these reasons. And the competition is going to say, well, that means we'd have to change ourselves in ways that would be very difficult. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll just cut the price. And the customer will then, 6B, come back and say, I love doing business with you, but here's the price from Dirtball Supply, here's last look. And they may ask us to be more competitive. They won't ask us to meet the price because we've sold them so well on our basic service value that they're saying, all right, I know you're a better total value, and I don't even dare ask you to meet the price, but could you be more competitive? And maybe we will have to shave our price a point or two, but the point is that if our costs are lower because we're doing it right the first time and we're giving the customer exactly what they want, our economics are going to win and the other guy is going to implode. Now what you'll find is that most of the competitors in the bottom 90% of distribution performance, if they're confronted with sort of a reinvented, refocused competitive challenge, they don't know what to do, and they don't seem to be able to make the changes, and so they just retreat from that niche to back to what they have, and eventually they sort of implode. Maybe another way of asking is why heretofore have only 3-4% of all the mature companies out there done a good job of this 7-step process? And I think part of it is just defining what it is. Once you know what the process is, then you can do it. So here are the key points from this thing. Every step that we go through in this process is going to have its, well, we can't really do that resistance pushback. And I think it was Henry Ford who said, if you think you can do it or you can't do it, you're right. So at each step, we're going to have to say, you know what, we have to change our assumptions, we have to change ourselves, reskill ourselves, rethink our jobs, our cross-training, how we help one another up and down the process line when a surge comes along, those sort of things. And beginnings are hard. We're going to fall on our face forward, but we're going to get it. And besides, most of the answers to most of these problems lay ahead, so that's going to maximize your gain for the least amount of pain. Thanks. Picking one customer niche at a time and dominating it is not something that's so easy to do because it isn't what most distributors have done anyway, historically. To be honest, most distributors have been product pushers. They've been market makers for the manufacturers they represent. If you look at the present facts, though, in most distribution companies, somewhere between 80 to 95% of all of the sales volume is on mature products. It's the same old products sold to mature customers who are the same old customers. So the amount of new product selling to new customers we're doing actually as a percent of our total sales is quite small. And what we find as we sell more and more mature commodity products to experienced repeat buyers is we're not going out and talking about the features and benefits of plain vanilla things anymore, but rather the customer is saying, hey, I need the best total economic deal. I'm under a lot of pressure. Now, a lot of times price, because it's the most visible, noticeable, measurable element of total procurement cost, gets over-focused. We've got to figure out the total economic story and make sure we can take away the customer's pain better than anybody else there. But now, for the rest of this particular module, I'm going to go through a number of what I call kind of maps or conceptual diagrams. And they're probably going to be a little abstract and confusing, but don't worry, they're really just setting up a lot of applications that we'll be talking about in the rest of Section 3. This first slide talks about life cycle. Think in terms of internet access. In 1995, really nobody very much was on the internet. In the last 6 years, 50% of the population at home or at work or both has access to the internet. So stage 1 is how do we teach people about using the net? Stage 2 is a race by internet service providers to sort of provide that service. And we're sort of filling up a whole new pail of opportunity or demand. But what happens, you see the bell-shaped curve below, not only does the year-to-year growth rate increase to that inflection point in the middle, but the number of competitors. I mean, at one point there must have been 6,000 different internet service providers. Once the growth rate starts to decelerate, though, because all the people who want it have it and the people that don't really don't, so it's slower going to get more penetration with the rest of the population, you find that prices get competitive and there starts to be consolidation of the suppliers. And towards the end, stage 3, customers are really looking for where they can get the best economic deal, not, can I find anybody at all to make the internet work for me. And what you find is, as you move along that curve, you go from selling products like you want it and I have it and there are not enough suppliers to there are too many suppliers and not enough demand. So now you have to start selling services, and then big customers want to take cost out, so you have to figure out how to routinize, systematize the relationship to lower both your costs and their costs. Sometimes you even get involved in getting deep into their business and figuring out how to integrate your two processes and even automate the relationship, where they'll say, you come in my plant and manage my storeroom and my inventory. In fact, you take all my inventory on consignment. So you realize you go from being a seller's agent, creating a market for a product, to really, in a sense, a buyer's agent, trying to lower their total procurement cost. And of course, each one of these stages has an impact on what we're really selling and how we sell and how we should compensate our people for what they are doing. Now, if you're in a mature industry and you're selling to customers who themselves are mature industries, their big MO, their motive that they want is to lower their total procurement cost, whatever that is. So we go out to them and say, hey, if you marry us, we can figure out how to work together to get our costs down and give you lower costs too, so we both win. Are you interested? And they're going to say, well, wait a minute, if we put all of our eggs in one supplier basket, we're going to put our eggs in the very best service provider. Are you the one? And hopefully we're going to say, yes, we are. Another conceptual way of thinking of your business is you're going to have to move from one end of the playing field to the other. Let's look at this slide. In this slide, the supplier end zone is on the left, the customer end zone is on the right. What I'm saying right now is most distributors, whether they know it or not, are still on the supplier's 10-yard line. They really are an off-the-balance sheet extended sales force for their manufacturers, even though they think they're customer-oriented. Whereas somebody who's doing in-plant storerooms, integrated sole supply contracts, etc., maybe as a pure consulting firm, not even being in the physical distribution, they're much more towards the customer end. We're still in the same ballpark, we're still selling the same product. But let's do some more reality checks to see what yard line we really are on. Let's do the printed material test. If I said, let me see all the printed material that your company has, I'm sure you'd say, here's our product catalog, and it's loaded with all of our lines and products and so forth. Let's do the education test. It's having salespeople sitting in sales meetings with suppliers, learning about new products, etc. I don't see any printed material about here's our number one niche, here are the most productive, profitable customers in that niche, here's how we're going after them, that sort of stuff. Earlier, we were talking about the test that all the employees should be able to pass. I'll pop it up here again, where it's the customer focus quiz. And I would dare say right now that the company from the management on down would not do well. They're not all in agreement on what the answers are to this slide. Likewise, if you look at the next slide, where we say it's not enough to segment our customers by traditional segments, we have to segment them by mode of selling. And we have to know where the boundary line is from outside salespeople calling, as opposed to telemarketers, as opposed to direct mail, as opposed to cash and carry, which is really glorified retail. And we can also subdivide buyers by yet another dimension, which is how they value what we're doing. Some buyers are psychological buyers. They buy from their friends. The great majority, maybe 80% or more, are really value buyers. They're buying total procurement cost, although they don't know what that is exactly. They're susceptible to being taught. And if we have services that reduce some or all of those elements of TPC, then they're going to be buying what we're selling. And really a very small percent, maybe 5%, of customers are pure price buyers. And we'll come back to that because I know a lot of people think it's a lot higher than that. But that would suggest, if you use this grid, if you had 5 traditional segments, you really have 60 theoretical niches. And we would want to define our niches by all 3 dimensions, not just the traditional segment description. And the next slide, when we go to each one of those theoretical niches and say to the 5 most important potential customers or existing customers, what is perfect service, we have to go through a process that helps us do this. I'm not going to the slide right now because we're going to come back and visit this in Module 4.1. But we've got to be able to do this if we're going to go after a niche at a time. And finally, this last slide suggests that 20% of our customers will generate about 120, 140% of our operating profit. That's because the bottom 50% of our customers we actually probably don't even break even and we lose money on. And so we've got to be able to measure customer profitability and we have to act. The guys that are screaming profitability winners, we've got to don't want to lose them, but the guys that are screaming losers, we've got to figure out how to shape them up or ship them out. So if we focus on the most profitable customers and the ones that are gazelles, they're high performers themselves, so if we partner them, they'll grow us. That's going to revive our historic growth niche. Now, we'll be looking in future module at measuring customer profitability and acting, and it's going to involve shaping up, shipping out, maybe in some cases weeding customers. But that also is going to free our time and energy to do an ever better job for the few customers that really matter, so we can over-focus on them and really be marriage material, so that those big important customers might really want them to marry us. So this, in summary, this module has given us a bunch of conceptual maps that we're now going to take another layer of look into, starting with the module 3.4, which is selling gazelles as a partner concept. Thanks. This module deals with, it's important for distributors that are selling very mature customer segments. You know, if you're selling an industry where it's growing 1, 2, 3% a year, how do you grow 2 to 5 times faster than that, or 6 to 15% a year? And the answer is, if you do, the only way to do it really is to go out and look for the high-performing customers out there and marry them, because then they'll grow you. But the reason they're growing fast in industry is they're eating the bottom 50% of all the customers' lunch. So conversely, you don't really want to go sell what I call the living dead. Guys that aren't growing, in fact, they're shrinking year after year after year, because they're going to go down screaming and hollering and leave you with a write-off someday. So we want to, partner the best. To help us in this task, let's first come up with some different types of customers that we might look at. For example, it's arguably, we might say, the top 10% of all the customers out there from a performance growth viewpoint we'll call gazelles. They're the guys that are growing 2 to 5 times faster than the industry, and they're making good money, so they put the money back in the business and they can pay their bills on time. 2 things: we want to grow faster and we want to get paid. There's some other customers that may grow quickly for a period of time, but then they collapse. Let's call them shooting stars. And what they really do is they just cut the price to buy market share. So for a while they grow, but they're not making any money. They don't make any money, they can't finance their inventory receivables, so they start leaning on their suppliers, one of them being us, until they tap out and leave us with a big bill to pay. That would suggest at the other extreme, number 4, maybe 50% of all the customers in a mature industry are the living dead. You can imagine, we've been talking about IDA distributors in the bottom 90% averaging 7.2% return. What if we took the bottom 50 of that group? You've got to know that they're doing much worse. So maybe they're the living dead. They've got such wrong assumptions and no will or vitality or imagination or whatever to turn themselves around. They're just sort of imploding over time. And that leaves a group in the middle we're really not sure. They're certainly not gazelles or shooting stars. They're maybe not the living dead, so let's just call them turtles, and we'll sort of put them aside for right now. So we're focusing right now on that top 10%. Now, when you use the term gazelle, it's actually kind of a hot term. There's a fellow named David Birch who coined that term a number of years ago. He had been tracking 10 million U.S. companies in a big longitudinal database study. And he said, it's amazing. It doesn't matter what industry you choose. It could be funeral parlors or buggy whip manufacturers, ice harvesters, industries you don't even know are around anymore. And he said 3% of all the players in any one of these industries actually is creating jobs. In other words, they're growing rapidly. He called them gazelles. Now, if somebody is in a mature channel, industry, and they're creating jobs for everyone they add, you can bet they're liquidating 1.5 or 2 jobs at one of the living dead that's going out of business. So at any rate, we have to ask a couple questions. Are we on a path to become a gazelle ourselves? And then how do we go, what selection criteria do we use to sort of pick out the gazelles from the shooting stars in our customer portfolio? So here's some selection criteria to consider. First of all, you look at their 5-year track record. If basically for the last 5 years they've been growing steadily and paying their bills steadily for 5 years and faster than most, that's a good deal. If you look at what I call is their kinetic chain, and you'll see that in section 5, there's a module on the kinetic chain. But to keep it simple, you can go talk to the leader of that company and they'll say, we don't try to be all things to all people. We are, here is who we're going after. Here is our unique marketing proposition, and here's why we deliver that consistently and better than anybody else. That's good. In the same light, if you go to the back door of that place and say, hey, buddy, Wally's out there on the receiving dock, tell me about your business, and Wally uses the term, we do this, as opposed to they, management, and we're different. If they're using the collective pronoun we, and they can articulate their strategy, they're all aligned and doing a job like a laser beam, so that's the kind of customer you want to go after. Ideally, if you had 2 or more of these customers, you'd go after one where you already have your foot in the door. It's tougher to be, get accepted as a supplier of any sort than it is maybe to go from 2% to 40% of a customer account. Ideally, the more access you have to the more people under one big roof, the more problems, possibilities, solutions, value-added ideas you're going to be able to come up with. So that increases your chances, particularly if a whole team is focusing on how to help that customer grow their bottom line. Another criteria would be, do they have a track record of buying value? And the way you ask that is to say, who was your number 1, 2, 3 supplier? Has it always been that way? If you've shifted volume from one to another, why have you? And they'll say, at one extreme, they're not going to say, oh, we spreadsheet everything every week, fax it out to the planet, cherry pick everybody, only take the lowest price. I'm not interested in an account like that. Or at the other extreme, we buy everything from one guy and have for 20 years because he's my brother. Well, obviously it's a psychological buy, and they're not going to buy my value this decade anyway. So we're looking for people who have, concrete, objective, measurable, valuable, reasons for why they shift business on a prudent basis from time to time. Another big criteria is to ask if they have other suppliers that they've had for a while that you could talk to. And when you talk to those other suppliers and say, these guys are great to do business with, they are partnerable, that's probably the best, credibility selection criteria you could have right there. And so those are some selection criteria that help you zero in on the best guys to focus. Now, if you look at your company right now and all its customers, every sales rep is apt to have 2, 3, 4, 5 customers. They'd say, hey, based on this criteria, Bruce, here's some candidates. And then the company may want to boil that down a little bit finer to say, here are the all-star candidates, and then we're going to figure out how to really go after those guys. Now, we could go out right away and say, hey, do you want to get married? And they might say, well, why should I marry you? And maybe we don't have the answer yet. We need to go through section 4 of this video series, which is all about defining, measuring, achieving, selling, getting paid for, and leveraging basic service brilliance. And we may not have the extra services that they may need to do what they want to do. But if we said, well, what's their biggest need of all? This slide suggests, well, they want to grow their bottom line. They've got too many competitors. There's not enough demand for what they're making. And so they've got to get efficient. So can we do that by first helping lowering their total procurement costs as far as the product we're selling? And then it may be possible in some channels that beyond lowering their costs, we can help them get more volume on a profitable basis. How do we not just sell to them, but through them? That's particularly an opportunity when you're dealing with independent business people, small business people, where you have access to owner-operators who are always looking for ways to grow their business, and you come up with advice, ideas, extra services, perhaps unbundled for fees, that that would let them do that. So we have to solve the cost iceberg problem continuously. In the 80s, people tended to focus on very visible things like price. Now they're saying, gee, we want to reduce shopping costs, inbound costs, paperwork costs. If it needs to be installed, maintained, technical safety, we're looking at the lifetime total cost of making a purchasing decision, not just what the price is up front. So what we have to do is several things simultaneously inside our business, and I think we can. I think as we share the numbers on a weekly, monthly, as-needed basis and develop financial fluency and ask questions about how we can improve, if we focus heavily on the modules to come in Section 4, which is all about achieving basic service brilliance. And one thing we can do right away, and it's coming to the next module, is to measure customer profitability and figure the two extremes. The most sensationally profitable, don't lose them, protect them, keep them, get a few more like them. And the most extremely money losing, and shape them up, ship them out. We can create extra profits, extra time and energy slack, to continue to work on basic service brilliance. Once we have that, then we can go continue to do a better job partnering the gazelles that we just talked about. Thanks. Congratulations, you finally arrived at a module where we get to the nitty-gritty cookbook how-to productivity, profitability building ideas. If you went and asked frontliners right now, do we have customers that we lose money on? Ask the inside salespeople, ask counter people, ask drivers. They'll say, yeah, there are customers that every day I stop a truck and I deliver, some little box of stuff. And I know the cost to stop in the truck exceeds, any kind of margin we could have in the stuff I'm delivering. It's a small order problem. Inside salespeople will tell you about people that are just obnoxious, and they return stuff, play games, all sorts of stuff. Credit managers will tell you about games they play over $200 of receivables ad nauseum. So they can tell you right away that they're losers, profit losers in your customer portfolio. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. If we actually got a way of measuring it and ranking customers, we'd be so panicked we'd really do something. So let's talk about some ranking reports. For example, if I said, who are the top 10 customers by sales at your company or your profit center, your distribution location, you could probably give me that list. If I said, what are the top 10 customers ranked by gross margin dollars, you could probably give me that list. And you'll know what? The two lists aren't the same, because sales volume at a thin margin percent isn't the same thing as smaller sales at a fatter margin percent. And since gross margin dollars is what pays the bills, that second report is, to me, more interesting than the first, ranking by sales. But if I said, give me a report ranking customers by their estimated profit before interest and tax contribution, a lot of companies don't have that report. And clearly, if we did, it would be very different than the first two and very much more important than the first two. So what we have to do is figure out how to come up with a report without getting caught up on our underwear, trying to be, with accounting allocation problems and so forth. So in this next slide, I've got an equation that allows any distributor to do a quick and dirty approximation of customer profitability. It's not perfect, but it's good enough to get you going. Now, in the implementation guide, there's an article that describes this in greater detail, but the gist of this is that we're going to take the gross margin dollars that we get annually or for some period of time from a customer, and we're going to subtract the cost of taking care of them, making an assumption that the number of transactions times an average cost of transactions is a fair approximation. And that's debatable for right now, but we'll come back to visit that a little bit later in the small order solution section. So just have faith and bear with me. If we do that report, and you put in cumulative ranking columns, you may find out that the top 10% of the customers might generate 50% of the profit, the top 20, 95. And this gets confusing. The top 40% of the customers generate 155% of the operating profit. Well, that's because the bottom 60 we actually lose money on. So if we lost 55% of our profits, you can see how we still total 100% of the customers generate 100% of the operating profit. Now, when you do this report and you show it to key managers who've been around for a long time, there's pushback, there's defensiveness. It's like, hey buddy, who are you? You're from the outside. You're some sort of consultant. You don't understand this industry. Our economics are different here, that kind of thing. There'll be nitpickers that say, well, wait a minute. The guys, at the bottom, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and what they're saying is this report is not perfect. So therefore, let's not look at it. What I'm saying is, according to my equation, the only way you can be at the top of the report is to have huge margin dollars and very small transactions. In other words, very large average order size. And any way you look at it, you make a lot of money on them. And maybe the perfect allocation of cost report in the sky, which is going to take 5 guys in 5 years to come up with, and we don't have the time or the money, number 1 would become number 3, and number 14 would become number 1. Who cares? The top 20 in this report are solid gold. Love them. Don't lose them, because it would kill your company. And let's find a few more like them. Whereas if you go to the bottom of the report, the only way to be at the bottom of the report is to have no margin dollars and zillions of transactions. And any way you want to rationalize it, justify whatever, they're huge losers or significant losers. And so we've got to figure out what we're going to do about this, because we can't go on this way. And for right now, we're not even going to worry about the 60% in the middle or so, because that's for another day, and we can maybe fine-tune our measurement tools later on. So what are the objectives of this customer profitability ranking report? Let's look at this next slide. First of all, we want the whole team to know who the 5, 10 most profitable customers are by heart, and not just team sell them, but do whatever you have to. If they start to ask a question, I don't care if you're a driver, inside sales guy, counter guy, whatever, the answer is yes. What's the question type of thing. If it's past quitting hours, the phone rings, it's your number 2 customer. Don't say, hey, it's past quitting time. You can say, or you can say it is, but say, we're going to take care of you anyway. So you do that kind of extra service heroics because they pay a disproportionate amount of your wages. And if you do that, they'll actually grow more than you thought. And then the second thing is, we look at our top 10 most profitable customers and say, is there a common pattern amongst them? Is there 3, 4, 5, 6 who would all fall into a category of, and you come up with a descriptive handle. And that's the way you start to figure out what your historic best number 1 niche is. Once we've done that, we can find 5 more customers who fit the same description and would be buying the same thing our 5 most profitable customers are. So it would be a logical group of customers to go after on a target basis. At the bottom end, if we shape up or ship out customers, they have 2 choices. They can order half as often, twice as much, pay higher prices and freight too. If they don't like it, they can go paralyze their competition. But what happens is our profits will go up, our empty transactional activity, meaning it has no margin dollars in it, goes down. And this frees up slack so we can take better care of the guys at the top of the report. It also makes us start to think about the small order problem, because there's scads of little customers who order only once in a while with little small orders. They're not big losers, but they're small losers, and we have to figure out what we're going to do about that. We also have to come to grips with our historic, unspoken assumptions about customers that may be flawed. First of all, there's an assumption that all customers are good customers. Well, it turns out that that's not the case. We have to rephrase that and say from now on, all the customers you do business with, it has to be on a win-win basis. We know they're winning if they keep calling us back, because they wouldn't keep calling us if they weren't winning. But we have to win. We have got to make a profit on them, or we have to say, no, thank you. We are not wired to make money off of you. You need to either go paralyze one of our competitors and cause them to lose money, or find another kind of supplier who has got a different business model, cost structure, who can take care of you, perhaps on a profitable basis. Second big assumption is more customers are better than fewer customers. The idea being more customers would give us more volume, and more volume would give us economies of scale. Well, earlier we learned in an earlier module that there are no economies of scale. Also, it may be that we're better off selling everything to somebody as opposed to selling a little bit of something to everybody. I could give you a case study where somebody went from 1,000 active accounts to 500 accounts and their volume quadrupled. How do you increase your sales 4-fold? Well, obviously the 500 accounts they got rid of by shaping up or shipping out were small, going nowhere, living dead kind of customers. But by super focusing on 20, 30, 40 Mongo accounts that had a future and getting a big share of them, that's what caused them to grow so rapidly. So that's the new sort of rephrased assumption we want to have. Another assumption is, well, if there's big volume with the customer, even though we're breaking even, that's okay because the big volume helps us buy better or manage our inventory better. And I turn around and say, I'm sorry, that's too vague. That's just too vague, and it's not either or necessarily. Either we have this or we don't. Why can't we go out and shape this guy up so we can keep their volume and make money? And we'll look at some of that in the future. So here's some recommendations for this application. First of all, read the article in the implementation guide very carefully. Secondly, do the ranking report. And because it is ranked, the winners and losers, it's an action report. It makes you so panicked you might lose somebody at the top, and makes you so angry at the bottom you're going to actually do something. Third, make everybody memorize the top 5 to 10% and hustle them hard because they pay a disproportionate percent of not only today's wages but future wages. You want job security? Take care of those guys. You want job growth? Find 5 more guys just like them. And then we're going to do teamwork on the worst accounts. And a big part of this is sort of truly understand the small order problem and dealing with that. So I've got several modules to get that story across. And so now we're ready for modules 3.6 to 3.12 to mop up on all these recommendations. Thanks. If we're going to have a win-win relationship with all the customers we do business with, we're going to have to learn to not only segment them into different groups, but service them differently. Right now, there are 2 money-losing problems that you probably have in your customer portfolio. One is within a niche of customers, there are some customers where your total service costs exceed the margin dollars and you're losing money. You need to take care of that. Another one is where customers really deserve more service for what they could be giving you, but because you are under-servicing them, you're losing their business. So the question is, how do we ship out the first group so we have more time and energy to allocate to the second group so they'll respond favorably and we can grow? A second major problem is if we have a standard way of providing service to customers, unknowingly we may be over-servicing some for which they're not going to pay for, or dis-servicing others. Remember in an earlier module I talked about a company where they had contractors who wanted to call at the end of the day for next morning delivery. But the industrial purchasing agents basically said that would be disservice. Sure, you're jumping through hoops to get here quickly, but it's too fast for our paperwork process, so that actually upsets us. There might be other people who say, well, it isn't too fast for us to receive it, but we don't need it for a week anyway, and I'm not going to pay you for the fast response time. So by figuring out different niches and exactly what they want and giving them just that, we're not having this over, under, miss, or disservice problem. So let's start with one niche and see how we can get our heads around this problem. First of all, we'd subdivide a niche by selling methods. And I've got A, B, C, D, and you can see the A guys get serviced by outside salespeople who are going out and selling total procurement cost systems solutions. We're not selling features and benefits on commodities anymore, and if we're selling to a mature customer segment, they want to lower their costs. And maybe even within the A strata, we have 4 subdivisions, because super A's are not the same as A4 accounts. The B strata of customers, we used to call them with outside salespeople, maybe we still do, but the cost of an outside salesperson is excessive for the margin dollars they're giving us. That doesn't mean, though, that we couldn't telemarket them and direct mail them with some sort of systematic approach, and that could still be a productive, profitable customer for us, and we're giving them more service than not calling them at all. So for a lot of guys who traditionally have sold with outside sales forces, that's sort of a fill-in-the-blank area where we don't necessarily have telemarketers that take care of that strata very well. Then, of course, they're just house accounts. They're small enough that we don't bother telemarketing or calling with outside sales. And then there are D customers who really aren't wholesale customers at all. They're retail customers. What they want is wholesale prices and wholesale services, but they want to give us a retail-sized order. And if somebody wants to give us a $20 order, even if we had a 50% margin in it, if our transaction cost is $60, we're still going to lose a lot of money on those guys. So what we've got to do is figure out how to set the boundary lines. In other words, where is the boundary line between A and B? How much gross margin dollar per month is necessary sooner or later? And I mean, not pretty quickly. We're not going to lose money on them forever. To justify outside sales as opposed to telemarketing and so forth. So that's one thing, is to set the boundaries. Secondly, how do we dynamically reassign? Because some accounts may grow and want outside sales coverage, or they may shrink and deserve telemarketing coverage. So how do we have a dynamic flow of accounts back and forth? Because right now, sales compensation plans and things like that would perhaps militate against that, and we need to rethink that. And the last, and maybe one of the most important things, is for each strata, we have to rethink our prices and terms and services for those strata. Let's look at the next slide to expand on this concept. On the left-hand side, historically, we probably had pretty constant price service terms for the bottom couple strata. Only when salespeople called on the red guys, at the top of the pyramid, did they say, well, for you, I can give you a contract price. And because you're bigger, I'll call on you more often, and I'll give you personal services and attention that in a way is a way of cutting the price or delivering more value. If you move to the right-hand side, you'll notice that we've reassigned some of the red accounts to telemarketing, and we now have truncated, we have changed the prices and terms for every category. So now D customers find out that we have strict minimum orders, and we charge them retail prices, and maybe they're COD or credit card only. If you become a C customer, you enjoy wholesale list prices, but there still are firm minimum orders and a very minimal hardball credit policy. Only when you get to be a B account would we consider, giving you something like free freight if you got a certain size order and so forth, and telemarketing and direct mail support. And then, of course, at the A account, instead of leaving the differentiation of the pricing and the service just up to the salesperson, we think in terms of institutionalize that on a systematic basis and finding out that the really AAA plus top of the pyramid accounts deserve far more than maybe what we've been given historically, and that's one of the keys to keeping them or cracking them if we have them as a target account. So if we create a system like this, then we could say, all right, historically, based on the last 12 months of history, is this account a A1, 2, 3, 4? Is it a B, C, D? And you might say, wait a minute, Bruce. You have just given a D classification to a guy who could be an A1. And there is a salesperson assigned to it. And I'd say, fine. We could have an override column where we'd say, we'll agree to give this customer A3, A2 prices, service, terms, but only for upfront contracted amount of time. It's kind of like selling drugs. You say, I've got really great services here I want to offer to you, but you don't believe me, so I'm going to let you demonstrate or sample them for free. So take a few toots on this, but once you really get hooked to it, then we're going to insist you have to give us so much volume per month. And you'll find 3-6 months down the road, when you say, all right, now it's time for you to buy X $1,000 per month to maintain the special service terms prices you have. Some will scream and holler, but if they don't put up, then we got to put them back down to B, C, or D where they belong. We cannot let them cherry pick us and then go buy all their volume somewhere else, is the point. Now, when you look at these four strata, it's very difficult to be excellent at all four. So typically, you do well to say, which one of these strata is going to be, we're going to be better than anybody on the planet at it. And the other ones, we're going to be good. But to try to be great, maybe stretching a little bit, because there are inherent compromises as far as trying to be too many things to too many people. Now, as you look at this business model and the idea of this hierarchy and treating customers differently, I anticipate some yes, but, kind of problems. Yes, but problems. So let's look at some of maybe the yes, but problems you're thinking about. First of all, you might say, wait a minute, Bruce, if you charge D customers retail list prices, it's like a retail store. You walk in and instead of 40 off list price, you're saying it's list retail price. They're going to say, forget it, I'm going to leave. And maybe that's not a bad thing. In other words, if we give them wholesale prices, but our transactional costs exceed the margin dollars in every order, let me put it this way. If you did the math and you found out that you were losing $20 every time these guys came in, you'd do better just to put a chest of $10 bills out there with a little sign, say, please come in, take a $10 bill, and leave. That's better than paralyzing our business and our people for the small order. So if they leave, that's not so bad. If they stay and pay a price and we make a profit on it, that's okay. We'll come back and revisit this in the small order series a bit later. Second yes but problem. We don't have any capability, Bruce, to do telemarketing. Well, if we hived off accounts from outside sales guys, who are telemarketers? And my answer is, well, you have to create that, because if you don't, someone else watching this video is, and they're going to beat you at that strata because they've got more perfect services at a lower cost geared to that particular strata of customers. A third one is big, which is our outside salespeople typically have lots of accounts with their sales number on it. That doesn't mean they necessarily call on them, but if those accounts do business, they get credit. It's part of their compensation program. And they're not going to like or put up with taking the accounts away. Well, I'm going to address this later on in Module 3.11, but for right now, don't worry about it. What we're going to take away is so minimal, we'll buy out the salespeople and give them a check for a whole year's worth of compensation of those accounts. So in theory, we can free up time to really go do a job on the big guys. Come back to that one. Point 4, besides better prices, what can we do for biggest accounts? Well, part of it is asking them. In other words, we can come up with all these ideas and do extra services thinking they're going to like it, but there's nothing like going out to your 5 most important customers, making them an advisory board and saying, where's your pain? And we're happy to take your pain away, but what will you pay for it? And the price has got to be higher than the cost so we can make a profit, otherwise we're not interested. So you'll find that if you listen carefully to the core, the franchise accounts in your number one niche, you will co-create and evolve successful extra services as needed. Also, there are other tools that we'll need. I make reference to some modules in Section 5, which are the wheel of learning and making good mistakes. And so, I'm going to give you the 2080 story right now. But when you go to try to do some of the stuff and the rubber doesn't meet the road, you're going to know, well, now what do we do? You have to be able to solve these small problems on your own, and I'll give you some tools later on for that. So what we're doing right now is saying, look, you got old problems, and we're not going to solve them with old methods. We need new assumptions. The new assumptions are going to open up sort of new opportunities for us to change and grow and get better, and we're going to have to follow new maps to do that. I realize the new maps are a bit scary, but first of all, it's done before. It's like Christopher Columbus going to the New World his 3rd time over. I mean, he had a lot of confidence he was going to pull it off, a lot more than he had the first time around. So take it on trust from me that these applications have been done a number of times at high-performing kinds of companies, and you can do it too. And then, alternatively, you could say, well, what's our next best alternative? To sort of sit here and hit our head against the wall and make a lousy return and not grow and not have a future for all our stakeholders. So let's summarize the key points of this module. First of all, we want to realign our service costs with customer gross margin dollars. So we're not over-servicing and losing money. We're not grossly under-servicing, which increases the odds we're going to lose the account or not crack it. If we do drive away empty activity, we'll make sure our profits go up faster, even though our sales are flat. But that's the key to creating slack to invest back in our target accounts to make things happen. And finally, every frontliner has to know by heart who's strategically important and have the flexibility and extra hustle desire to make things happen on the spot for the franchise and target accounts. Thank you. In this module, we're going to talk about measures that we can take to better super serve franchise accounts. Those are accounts where we have Mongo volume at a very profitable basis, so it's a big part of our business. And then target accounts that could be a big part of our future profit streams. And the assumption is that if 5% of our current customers are about 50% of our profit before interest and tax, we sure don't want to lose them. We want to try to build on them. And we want to find other ones that are like those. So it's really a handful of accounts that will give us job security today, and another handful of accounts that's going to give us job growth down the road. So we need to know who they are so we can super serve them on an optimal basis. These are a number of account measures that we might take. First of all, take the 5-10 most profitable customers and the 5-10 most important target accounts, and if we can, in a discrete place, put lists on the wall, even pictures if that's appropriate. So we're now not taking care of a piece of paperwork, we're taking care of a group of human beings that really depend on our service to make their business hum. Everybody should know these accounts by heart so that spontaneously, if one of these customers needs an extra favor outside the normal rules and regulations, policies of our company, we're basically saying, hey, the answer is yes, what's the question? Clearly, it'd be great if the computer system would flag these accounts. And you could expand that to say earlier, in an earlier module, we talked about A1, 2, 3, 4 accounts, B accounts, C accounts, D accounts. So they get flagged, so we just know who the super duper customers are. So again, we can act preferentially on their behalf. It would be ideal if we had a team selling schedule. Ideally, we want to try to create a very thick rope of many strands where lots of our people know lots of their people. So if one strand breaks, we're still going to keep the relationship strong. So we may make a list of people from the CEO of the total corporation down to branch managers, buyers, inside salespeople, then ask on a grid of target accounts, the franchise accounts, is it appropriate? It may not be at all for any or all these people to call on some of these accounts over the next year. If so, how often, when, how do we set it up, what are we trying to make happen, and then have the discipline to execute the schedule. Then on a quarterly basis, we should have brain trust review sessions where salespeople who are on the account sit down with other people and brainstorm all that is and could be done to look for new angles, ideas, toeholds that we can get into an account to try to make things happen. If we look at our franchise customers, we may be able to pick 4, 5, 6 of them that actually could serve on an advisory board. You may even have one per branch that you would meet with on a 2-3 time a year basis to sort of talk about your ongoing effort to build value for customers and let them weigh in on what they like, what they don't like. And in a sense, they're helping you to co-create viable extra services. A viable extra service is that the value they put on it or the reward we get exceeds the cost of our doing it. If it costs us more to do than what we get rewarded, then we start losing less money, and that's not win-win. So we've got to make sure it's a win-win deal. And then look for general extra service hustles. What I found out is if you do these measures, certain things happen. I would say on average, the franchise accounts, after a full year of this kind of treatment, are apt to go up maybe 2-3 times the growth rate of the rest of the company. Part of that is a bit surprising because sometimes you think you have all the business at the franchise accounts, but I found from experience that buyers often say to our people, well, you have all my business, because that's a way of getting to stop bugging me. The truth of the matter is I've got 2 or 3 suppliers. Yeah, you get the lion's share, but there's always more, it seems. So they'll actually go up. As far as the target accounts, nothing much happens maybe for the first 3 to 6 months, but if something is going to happen, you will know within 6 to 9 months. But that's assuming that the salesperson who is on that target account is a natural account cracker kind of person. And not all salespeople are, and that's not necessarily good or bad. Sometimes there are trade-offs. There are people who are very good hunters as opposed to people who are very good farmers or maintainers. So the key is to make sure that we have, at least through a team effort, if not through account reassignment, really good account cracking, ingenuity and energy going after those kind of accounts. Then finally, when you get the advisory boards going at each one of your profit centers, if you really think about it, to have 4 to 7 best customers show up at a, appropriately priced central meeting place. We have a little room, a meeting room at one end, a little, buffet dinner, simple kind of thing at the other end. You meet from maybe 5:30 to 7:30, and your key people can be there. It's a way for lots of our people to schmooze with, and they bring some of their lieutenants on, some of their people. There's actually a lot of effective team selling going on there. But you have an agenda, and you've worked it out in advance about where their pain is, where they want to go and grow, how we can lower the costs, how we can help them grow their bottom line one way or the other. And through that, we evolve extra services on a win-win basis. Let's look at what I call the augmented product. In this slide, the center circle 1 is the tangible product you sell. You go out in the warehouse, you're looking at it, but every other competitor has the same thing. Circle 2 is basic expected services that we provide, and so does everybody else. Section 4 of this video talks about how we're going to shoot the lights out on Circle 2, how we are going to define exactly what those expected services are, measure, achieve, sell, get paid for it. Circle 3 are extra services that we might do as extra icing on the cake or to help a relationship move along in some sort of productive win-win way. And that's where we have to be very careful. We also have to tune these services to each segment and each strata of customer. And basically what we find out is, looking at this model, there's no such thing as a commodity product. Because of how we wrap that commodity in our services, we can make it different, we can make an issue, we can be value added or better, distinctive where other people aren't. Think FedEx versus the post office and overnight letter delivery, for example. Second point is you have to build from the inside out. You have to have quality commodities in Circle 1. Then you have to have basic service brilliance to go out and say, here we have Circle 3 extras, but we don't have it in stock today and we didn't do it right, we didn't execute 0 errors on-time delivery. That blows up in your face. You have to do it from the inside out or the third thing fails. Also, in this model, you don't see a lot of the give and take that goes on between in customer relationships where customers have problems. Mistakes happen. They have oversights. They're basically calling and saying, could you help me? And we say, sure. And it's a very custom one-off kind of thing. This is not a systematic extra service we do every day. But when we do those, we have to say, well, gee, I'm happy to do this, but can I bank measurable goodwill points with you so sometime in the future you can return a favor to me? So that goodwill creation and trading back and forth is an important thing in high-performance relationships, but I don't have it in the model, so don't forget about that. When it comes to Circle 3, the tendency is let's do cheap little extras and not charge for it, kind of like you go to a hotel and they give you free shampoo and they didn't charge you for it. But you'll find that important extras sometimes involve a lot of time and energy, and if you really figured out the full-blown cost and marked it up, said to the customer, look, here's the price, and they say, oh, I'm not going to pay for it, then it's not really a viable extra service. I think that's a good acid test to try as often as not to unbundle the services for fees. Because when the customer says, oh, you're going to make it up in volume, you really have all the volume. And the prices are everyday low prices too. So let's go to some key summary points for this module. First of all, we have to know the key accounts, franchise and target, that are our future. Secondly, we have to have a total system involving all the employees so that we can make things happen for these kinds of accounts. And what you'll find is there are lots of strategic little opportunities where a little extra effort, a little extra hustle, a little imagination, creativity can really be quite heroic and have a big impact on busting open these accounts from one of the frontliners that has a touch point when the customer has a problem. Also, you think, well, I don't have time to hustle and do these extra things. It's sort of tough to do special deliveries on your truck when your truck's busy rolling around town delivering small orders to losing customers. But if we can put in the small order problem and we can shape up or ship out customers who have huge transactional activity with no margin, we'll free up the time and energy that can naturally flow on a strategic basis to these best customers. And lastly, we don't want to give away any extra services thinking we're going to make it up on volume. It's too nebulous and you always get burnt. Thanks. This module introduces solving the small order problem. And before we get into sort of the mechanics and break it into 4 separate pieces, we need some basic concepts. So let's go over a few things. First of all, I wonder if any of you have ever touched an order and thought, we're losing money on this. My intuition just tells me we can't be jerking around with a $30 order that might have $9 of gross margin dollars in it and make money on it. If you went and you asked other administrative people who touch C customers or drivers, they'd all sort of intuitively say, yeah, I've seen money-losing orders, money-losing customers. We ranked customers from high to low a few modules back and found that we had a lot of losing customers based on order size economics. So in this module, we're going to look at what I call sufficiently good transactional cost economics. We're not going to get into something called activity-based costing, which is really too complicated and isn't necessary. But let's start off first with what I call your value chain. So let's look at this next slide. If you think about the biggest everyday process in your business, it's stuff flowing through your warehouse to your customers. It's order fulfillment, same old stuff to same old customers. And it starts with, number one, buyers are ordering goods. Number two, the goods arrive at the freight dock and it's got to be received into the warehouse. Then the next step in the chronological process is it sits in inventory for some period of time, 74, 75 days we saw in a previous module for industrial distributors. Step 4 is order entry pathways come into this process. Outside sales guys could take an order, inside salespeople could take an order, that kind of thing. So it creates a pick ticket and the stuff's picked, packed, and staged in the warehouse. Then you go through shipping and delivery. Then the next step is you invoice and you provide free trade credit. It's like a revolving 30-day loan for customers. And then lastly, there's ongoing maintenance of the customer. So when you look at sales marketing and realize that somewhere between 80 to 95% of our volume is the same old stuff, the same old customers going through this process, you say, well, gosh, a big part of sales marketing really is just maintenance. It's not going out and getting new business. It's just taking care of what we have. On the right-hand side, if you look at all the support services, warehouse, supervisory, data processing, audit, finance, and so forth, those things very quickly all become variable costs. I know people think they're fixed, but they're not. Just trust me on this one. So that's the biggest Mongo process that's going through your business. Now, if you figure that if total sales, 80 to 95% involves that process, all other things you think you're doing are really kind of miscellaneous category. So I'm going to make kind of a rude, crude assumption here, and just to say, hey, let's just assume that other activities we're doing are negligible for now. And if we wanted to look at that process and try to attach one metric to the end of it to give us an idea of what's going on, it would just be transactions that are flowing through the process. So if we divide total sales by the total number of transactions going through the business, we might come up with some interesting numbers. So let's do some transactional math for the typical IDA distributor in these next two slides. This first slide, it turns out that if the average IDA reporting distributor to their profit report did 8.1 million in sales, they had 23,151 transactions, which worked out to be $350 in sales per transaction. We can take the same number of transactions and divide it into the annual gross margin dollars, the total cost of running the business, and even PBIT, profit before tax, and you'll get the right-hand set of numbers where we find out the average transaction had $86, almost $87 in gross margin in it. The average transaction cost $81 to process, so about $5.60 was made per transaction. If you got one more order and you ran it through the process, you'd say, well, maybe half of the cost is for all the overhead support services and half is for the actual process running through. So let's just split it arbitrarily or simplistically into $40 incremental cost for running it through the process and $40 for overhead allocation. So what? So it would suggest that if we had a $100 order that happened to come along, a small order, below the $350 average, and we had a 25% margin in it, which is an average margin, you could see that we would have, just looking at incremental cost of one more order through the process, a loss of $15. If we put in overhead allocation, we'd say, well, actually, we lost $55. Now I have to ask a question, which is it? Well, if you only had one small order for the year, and it was for $100, you could arguably say we lost $15 on that order. But if you have 1,000 small orders that go through the process, then you have to start allocating the overhead stuff because the math doesn't work out. So if you asked people in support services, well, do you have more variable activity up here if they're small orders? The people in the audit department will say, sure. The auditors come in and they look at every 10th invoice we send out. Credit managers say, gosh, it's small customers with small orders that take the disproportionate amount of all our credit people's time, etc. So I think that you're going to find very quickly that those support costs are quite variable. Now, if you did some ranking reports and you said, let's rank all the transactions that went through the business, 23,000, and we put in cumulative counting columns to find out what percent of the transactions accounted for what percent of the gross margin dollars, you would find statistics like the bottom 50% of the transactions, we're talking about 12,000 transactions, may account for as little as 5% of the gross margin dollars for the year. Or if you rank customers from high to low by just their average gross margin dollar per transaction, a little bar means gross margin when you see it. You'd be shocked at how many would be below the $80 line. You'd be shocked at how many would be below the $40 line. If you rank sales territories by average order size, that is gross margin dollar per transaction, and average margin percent, you'd find some interesting patterns. So let's look at this next slide. Here, we've ranked salespeople, and you see territory number 6, they average $200 in gross margin per transaction, and at a 20% margin percent, and there's a little typo there in that slide, percent of 20%, you multiply the two together, you get a PF, a profit factor of 40. Don't worry about PF, it's just some factor to relate these two things together. But what's interesting is the guy at the top of the report gets bigger orders at an okay margin percent, whereas the guy at the bottom gets small orders at maybe a pretty good margin percent, in this case 33%, but you can see his order size has dropped so much, it's still a very low profit factor. So you start to realize there are even some sales territories where the economics are below water as far as making any kind of money. So the point is this: we got a lot of money-losing small orders paralyzing our business, and we cannot solve this in a universal small order policy way. We're not going to send a letter out to all of our customers saying, from now on, you need $350 per order, we're not taking the order. Big guys just aren't going to like that. So the key is, if you average a decent-sized order we make money on, that's okay, we'll tolerate some small orders. So how do we deal with this problem? I think the best way to do it is to break it up into 4 parts and deal with each part separately. So in the next module, we'll do that. We'll look at the 4 parts with this understanding of basic order size transactional economics that we've just been through. Thanks. In this module, we're going to break the smaller problem down into 4 separate pieces. In the last module, we said, we've got a huge opportunity. The bottom 50% of our transactions are only 5% of our margin dollars. What are we going to do about this? Well, here are the 4 kinds of small order problems we have. First of all, you have customers who have high average gross margin dollar per transaction, and they have an occasional small order. And the answer is, we're not going to do anything. That's just part of accommodating profitable customers. Number 2, we have good sales volume with a customer, but they're all small orders. We're going to team visit these guys, and we're going to co-create a new solution, because usually not only are we losing, but they're losing, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Third, there are lots of small customers who accumulate over a long period of time who basically give us nothing but small orders. For these people, we're going to send them letters, and structurally we're going to change prices and terms. We're prepared to lose 20, 30, 40% of them perhaps, but we'll make money on the balance. And then a 4th category of small orders are small orders that we create ourselves unknowingly. With a number of small adjustments, we can improve that dramatically. Now, when it comes to solving these problems, when you go to the big offenders, and typically this is a team sell thing where honcho will go to the sales guy to call on big offender, because when you go with a honcho, hopefully you're going to get to a higher level person who also can look at their total economic. Because what you'll find out is, just as it costs a distributor $80 of transactional activity per transaction, it's costing the buyer a like amount of money. And if they're a larger corporation, sometimes it's quite a bit more even. It could be $100, $120 per transaction. So in a sense, we're both killing ourselves with all this paperwork and people time and effort for small potatoes of goods involved. Also, when you're delivering a lot of little frequent orders, it suggests the reorder point at our customer's place is 0, and oh my gosh, I need one now. So when you see frequent, perhaps panic buying of small quantities, there is downtime or lost productivity going on at the customer's place. In a retail environment, you'll find that the retail customer is losing sales because they've stocked out of something. So we're going to go out and give them the win-win pitch. And what I find out is that when you do that, 6 to 8 out of 10 of these people say, by all means, we're happy to change and order less often in greater quantities. We have to reassess our reorder points or reorder quantities, that sort of stuff. And our salespeople can help do that process because that's what they're there for in a sense. And there are two reasons. One is it's going to help the customer save money on a total procurement cost basis, but and not have the downtime out of stock problem. But we basically say, what's our alternative? Because if that doesn't work, we're going to have to raise prices terms anyway because we're losing money. So would you please accommodate us? And I think most people realize it's got to be a win-win deal and they go along. Now, what do you do with the 2, 3, 4 out of 10 who say, absolutely not, I'm not going to do this, I refuse, you do this, I'm going to move all my business somewhere else? Well, what's your choice? You're just going to lose a lot of money on them? Or you say, I'm sorry, here are the new prices and terms, and you play hardball. They may go on strike for X weeks, but surprisingly, I would say at least half of them, if not all of them, will come back sooner or later, because if you've got great service and you had wisdom of what you're saying, these things self-correct in time. Now, the little guys that quietly accumulate over time, that we're going to send letters out and play systematic hardball with, I'm going to postpone that to the next module just to try to keep these in 10-minute increments. Now the ones we create, we will look at right now at this next slide. If we have low fill rates because a truckload of commodity, fast-moving stuff arrived yesterday but is yet to be received into not just the physical warehouse space but put in the computer, the next day we could actually have lower fill rates because the stuff isn't showing up on the computer. And now what we're doing is one of several things. We may say, can I ship you some now and the balance tomorrow, which creates twice the transactional cost and activity, and it's a disservice for the customer. Maybe this would always, they don't need two pieces of delivery paperwork. Maybe they need all the stuff today. Or secondly, we just cheat. We run out there and grab some stuff off the pile before it's been received and ship it out anyway, which really plays havoc with cycle count accuracy, etc. People will call up and they'll order 10 widgets. And we only have 8. And without even asking, we back order the 2 or offer to back order the 2. Instead, maybe we should say, we only have 8. Can we ship that as a complete order? Or if you really need 10 to get the job done, could we give you 8 of these and 2 of something else, maybe a little bit more expensive, but it would do the job because the money the concession we're going to give you on the goods is far less than another transactional cost, and it of course helps you take care of the problem right now. So it's don't back order a small order if you can avoid it. The next one is ordering the balance out of a hub location. A lot of times people get so caught up at a branch trying to keep their inventory very lean and making their turns look really good, they tend to order lots of stuff just in time from the mother ship. And since we're not looking at transactional costs, we're double killing ourselves. Sure, one of the satellites has got great turns, but we actually are killing ourselves from a transactional cost at both the branch and the mother ship. Probably a better thing is to look at true transactional costs and carrying costs for inventory and install those as transfer prices to the satellite branch. So now they're going, wait a minute, if I order a lot of little quantities from the mother branch and I'm getting socked, full carrying costs for D items that move slowly over there and transactional fees too plus out-of-pocket freight, it pays me to have more here locally, as they should. So in other words, that's a total economic optimization where we may have a little bit more inventory in the system in total, but we more than make it up on transactional cost economics. And then the last category are lines of products or customer segments that fragment. And I'll have to explain that. So we close them out or rethink them, and I'll cover that in Module 310. Now, you're going to have pushbacks to this because that's always the way there is. Somebody comes up with a big revolutionary idea. People go, wait a minute, I'm not sure. That's okay. Here are some of the common concerns. First of all, if we send a letter out to all the little guys saying this is our new minimum order, yada, 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 some of these guys are going to get upset, and when they get to be big, they're going to take it out. They're going to say, 25 years ago when I was a little guy, you made me pay more and whatever, and I resent that, and now that I'm big, I'm not going to reward you and let you, do business with you. Well, first of all, 99% of the little guys aren't going to get bigger anyway. It's kind of the acorn theory. Acorns at nurseries, where they're planted in even rows and perfect soil, and the weeds are pulled and all that sort of stuff, they grow nicely. But in a mature forest, hundreds of thousands of acorns fall to the floor of the forest, and they're not going to get enough soil and light to grow. So most of these little guys are not going anywhere. And if somebody ever did get big enough in this day and age, I think that it's kind of like, well, what's in it for me right now? And if we have the best total procurement cost solution down the road, I think we'd have a shot at that customer. I'm not saying, though, that out of 100 little accounts, we might not take 3, 4, 5 and say, you know, these guys, based on some selection criteria, have greater odds of being something. So maybe we'll cut them a little slack for 6 months at a time just to see how it goes along. Another big concern. Wait a minute, what if a lot of these little guys leave and we lose $20,000 in gross margin? You know, we still have the same expenses, we just have less contribution. Well, the assumption is that we would have the same expenses. Maybe it's possible that, first of all, instead of doing a massive mailing and hammering lots of guys simultaneously, we start at the very bottom of the list and we systematically do a little bit at a time. Or you have to realize that we may have the same expenses, but we're massively investing that time and energy, that slack, into taking better care of target accounts, franchise accounts, and we may actually be able to, within a 12-month time frame, literally get more sales and margin dollars than we lost with these little guys. Another pushback is well, what about the abusers, the 2 to 4 that say, no way, I'm not going to change? Sales guys aren't going to stand for that. If our outside salespeople are already getting credit for small orders from big or small customers, they have no incentive at all to want to change or go along with this program. For that, we need a different compensation schedule, which I'm going to come back to. And but the key thing is to focus on these potential payoffs. If we make this program work, we can double our profits with 5% less sales and margin dollars temporarily and have 50% less headaches. We can create slack that allows us to do breakthrough service and focus on the best accounts. And what we're doing is planting the seeds for future faster growth and profits. So those are the things to keep our minds on. And that's the end of this module. Now let's go on to the next part of small orders.